Good evening, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland in Shenzhen, China, just south of the Tropic of Cancer. But the guest I have on my show is north of the Tropic of Cancer. And Ed Curtin is in Massachusetts. How are you doing today, Ed?
I'm doing great, Jeff.
Hey, listen, let me tell you about Ed. Ed was educated in the classics, philosophy, literature, theology, and sociology. He teaches sociology at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. His writing on varied topics has appeared widely over many years. He states, I write as a public intellectual for the general public, not as a specialist for a narrow readership. I believe a non-committal sociology is an impossibility, and therefore see all my work as an effort to enhance human freedom through understanding. And he has a website that he's been writing on for years. He also is a contributing editor slash journalist on the Greenville Post. So thank you so much for coming on tonight, Ed. Really glad to have you.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm really glad to be with you there in China.
Halfway around the world.
Sounds good.
Hey, listen, Ed, please tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, like me, I suspect you did not pop out of your mother's womb fully aware of the machinations of Western Empire. You know, what was your arc of understanding? I mean, was it a slow realization or a sudden epiphany? How did you get to be where you're doing such outstanding writing against the evils of empire and capitalism?
Well, I didn't pop out fully formed from my mother's womb, that's for sure. Well, I grew up in the Bronx, in New York City.
Okay, all right. Iconic.
Yeah, iconic, right. And, I attended Catholic schools. I was brought up a Catholic. I think that influenced me significantly in terms of developing a sense of personal conscience upon which I had to base my life. And I went through a rather conventional education up until I was trained by the Jesuit priest in high school. And then in college, I had a teacher who opened my eyes. His name was Bill Frayne. He was a real kick-ass, radical Irishman from Queens, New York, a friend of Jimmy Breslin and Father Daniel Berrigan.
Oh, wow.
And in college, Bill introduced me to certain books, two that I recall significantly influenced me. One was a book called In Solitary Witness, which was a book written by an author named Gordon Zahn. I think he was a sociologist, as I recall. I'm not sure. And it's about a guy named Franz Jägerstätter, who was a German resistor to Hitler, and who was, because of his refusal to enter the German military, against all the advice of his family and church and so forth, he stuck to his guns and was beheaded. And I read that book, and it had a big influence on me. And then another book that Bill introduced me to was a book by the Italian author Ignazio Solone, and the title of that book is Bread and Wine. It's a novel. And it also is about an individual, a communist in Italy who opposes the fascist dictatorship. And, you know, I think both of those books significantly influenced me. And then after college, I was in the Marines.
Oh, wow.
But when I was in the Marines, I decided that I shouldn't be in the Marines, and I was against the Vietnam War. And I got introduced to Father Daniel Berrigan, the famous anti-war priest, who at that time became part of a group called the Catonsville Nine, who burned draft records in 1968. I think it was May 1968. And so I was introduced to Dan Berrigan, and we became friends, and Dan influenced me greatly. And to make a long story short, I got out of the Marines. I became a conscientious objector, and I guess that's where it all started.
Wow, quite early in your life, actually.
Yeah.
Amazing. I wish I could say that. I didn't really figure it out until about 10 years ago. But we all take different paths, and even in the 80s and 90s, I was sort of a bourgeois objector, but I was not ready to cross that line, to denounce American empire, and that didn't really happen until I got back to China in 2010. So, well, I'm glad to hear that you have been enlightened a lot longer than I have been. So, hey, listen, I love your writing. You just, it's hard to describe, and I'm going to put all of the, links that I talk about in the article for our interview. You just have this kind of almost like literary, lilting kind of a droll. Maybe it's growing up in the Bronx, but you have this just kind of like lilting droll, and maybe the Irish, this kind of droll sense of humor, and it's really good. And you really enjoy mixing cultural references in your work, like using, like in one of your recent articles on the Greenville Post, you used, you played off of Don McLean's song, American Pie, and then you did a whole article about Vincent van Gogh, a movie, the British group, XTC, one of my faves of all time. And one of my fave albums of all time, None Such. And you mentioned Chris Christopherson at one point, although I did not catch the significance of that. And my work is also full of cultural icons. And I even include related songs, like at the end of some of my articles, and so it's refreshing for me to meet to find a fellow writer like you that kind of does the same thing. What is your inspiration, and why do you do that? I mean, you're talking about the evils of empire and the evils of capitalism and everything else, and yet you spin off on these amazing cultural tangents. What's going on?
Well, that's a very good question. I ask myself that too. Well, I think that cultural references, as you say, and a lot of mine are to music and to literature and poetry, is as important in communicating with people as is straight out political writing. And that regular people, not academics or people who consider themselves intellectual, connect more with a writer's work if they can connect with these songs, poetry, literary works, and so forth. And I think music is extremely powerful. I was thinking of this actually yesterday. I don't know if this is true or not. I believe I heard it once long ago. that there's a Chinese saying, and you correct me if I'm wrong, a Chinese saying that if you can control the songs of a people, you can control the people.
Well, I'll look into that one. Yeah, go ahead, keep going. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, the reverse is also true. There is so much of music that is subversive, thought-provoking, emotionally gripping, that I think it pulls people into a piece of writing in a way that logic and reason often fail to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you know, I'm as much a literary, philosophical, artistic person as I am a political writer. And I made a decision a while back or long ago that the way to write was not to write in one straightforward way, but to write like a life is, in a serendipitous way, from this to that, and not follow the straight path, because that's not the way life is for people.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, you know, my first book, 44 Days, you know, I had so many cultural references in it. I actually did a glossary because I figured all these non-Americans are going to be reading it, and they needed to know what they all were. And so I agree with you. I don't know why. I'll be sitting there, you know, writing about, you know, some dastardly deed, and then like a song will pop in my head, and I'm just like, wow, I got to include this at the end of the article to kind of celebrate. It's just it's amazing the power that, you know, music and movies for me also, and books and have on our you know, socio-political inspiration. Hey, listen.
Yes, they go so deep.
Yeah, they really do. Hey, listen. You just recently, I think maybe in the last couple of months, you wrote a satirical piece about it was just brilliant, about marrying yourself and inviting anime hologram friends over to your house. It was incredibly hilarious. And there was also that great movie about the guy having a computerized girlfriend, you know, Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson, and 2013's Her, H-E-R. And there was also Ryan Gosling in 2007's, you know, Larson, the Real Girl, where he was happily, you know, in love with a blow-up doll. And in Blade Runner 2049, Gosling also had sex with a hologram robot. And lately, I have seen reports of sophisticated whorehouses with lusty animatronic robot women, or bars where, you know, guys can get oral sex from the same set of machines. Or for a few $1,000s, you can custom order one to look like your favorite media star and screw her to your heart's delight in the privacy of your home. You can even program them to grunt and groan. I mean, you know, your article just brought up so much about a Western society, and what does it tell you? What does all this tell you about, you know, the evolution of Western society? You know, why and why now? Or is it like, you know, Pygmalion, you know, which is a Greek tragedy, you know, from 2,500 years ago? Has this been going on for a long time? I mean, just kind of spin off on your article in Western culture and society. It was really good.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I think it's been going on for a long time. Probably goes back to Plato's cave, and the shadows on the wall. But now we're in this internet screen world where the human body and human exchanges between people have become less and less, and life has become so abstract behind these screens. And it seems to me that the issue of the human body the issue of the fact that we are flesh and blood, that throughout the world there are real people who are dying, who are being killed, who are being blown up, who are being tortured. And there are people who are eating their breakfast and eating their dinner and hugging each other. This has been lost in this screen internet culture in which everything is abstract. And I believe it's, I can't say it was organized and was done in some conspiratorial sense, but the results are obviously there for anyone who wants to look. And I think it's really very, very dangerous because, you know, if you, as you recall, President Obama, and I'm sure Trump does the same thing, you know, we kill people with drones, it's all on screens, it doesn't, no one feels anything. They've become dead inside. And the sexuality part is a big part of it. From what I understand, people in the United States are having less and less sex. No, seriously. The Atlantic Monthly had an article recently about young people having less and less sex, and I think that's true also. And I teach college kids, and they seem to agree with that. There's something very, very weird going on, and you know, and as you said, now you can have a robot. It's just a kind of self-centered, masturbatory world in which the rest of the world and human romance and love and care and concern. I think this goes back, you know, you asked me, like, where did I come from? That book that I referenced, Bread and Wine, by Ignazio Salone. Bread and wine, you know, body and soul. It all goes together. I know that Andrei Litchik writes. He's written this. You know, he does wonderful stuff, and he says, you know, in these other countries, this idea of this human connection is there, and even under the bombs. But here in the U.S., it seems to have been lost.
Yeah.
And in other countries too, of course. So,
well, I you know, you're not the first guest that's talked about this. You know, about how, you know, about Western culture, you know, has just become, you know, just soulless. And in another article you wrote about, you know, and just to kind of seek into that with all these sex robots, you know, is the soullessness, you know, of Western consumer society, you know, the working stiff part, which you nailed on the head in an article using the 2018 Vincent van Gogh themed movie with Willem Dafoe, which I have not seen, but it sounds really good, called At Eternity's Gate, and you use that as a vehicle. And in your article, you ask, what is work? What is work for? What is life for? Why paint? What does it mean to live? Why do you do what you do? Are you living or are you dead? What are you seeking through your work? Then you wrote about how our owners, well, I like to call them the elites, our owners, how our owners create screens of cliches to hide reality. Please share your thoughts on this.
Well, when I went to see this film, At Eternity's Gate, I was one of perhaps 3 or 4 people in the theater. And I snuck in a little glass of vino
I love it.
to to enjoy it and to luxuriate in the paintings that I knew would be part of the film, because the film was made by a painter himself. And the sensuality and the spirituality of Van Gogh's work and the way the movie conveyed that got me really thinking about my life, how it started, why people do what they do, why they spend their lives in deadening work. I understand the social class aspects of it. I understand people need to work to get money in a capitalist economy. But at the same time, what is the point to being alive if you cannot enjoy your days? And this is something that I think about a lot, because writing about very charged political things and terrible things, like something that I just wrote about the killing of Senator Robert Kennedy, you also need to live a life, and you have to enjoy yourself, and you have to take joy even when you're writing about these terrible things. Mm-hmm. And so I've always wondered about that. I had a job when I was young for a summer. I got it through a relative, and I worked in a big office building, and I thought, my God, I'm in hell. I can never do this again. This can't be my life. And I never will do it again, and I never did. But there's a price to be paid for that, because those buildings are the places of money. Those are the places where, if you want a lot of money, you can get a lot of money if you're willing to kill yourself slowly. Mm-hmm. And so I chose another path. I guess it's sort of like the path that Van Gogh chose, to try to create beauty and live in nature, and be part of the sensuous world. And that movie really stirred me to my depths.
Well, I will watch it. I'll find it this summer when we go back to France and watch it. It sounds, and Willem Dafoe is one of my favorite actors too. So,
he's wonderful. He's just fantastic.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Hey, listen. Speaking of screens of cliches hiding reality, I want to congratulate you on having the courage to expose Western Empire's endless addiction to false flags at home and abroad. And I see you know about William Pepper's courageous work. You wrote about that, and I'll put all the links in the article, with the King family's grand jury convicting the U.S. government of murdering Martin Luther King Jr. He is also doing the same thing for the bogus charges against Sirhan Sirhan and RFK's government murder. We have both read James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable. And Pepper has sworn affidavits that LBJ, J. Edgar Hoover, and the heads of the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Chase Manhattan Bank actually met to plan and schedule JFK's very public assassination. And don't even get me started on 9/11, the mirage of the Apollo moon landings, and so many other hoaxes and false flags. And then just I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, you wrote an article on the Greenville Post about Lisa Pease's new book called A Lie Too Big to Fail, the real history of the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, which I'm sure is clearly a baton being taken from all the work that, in cooperation with everything that William Pepper's come up with. Clearly, our owners can make us believe anything they want in order to maintain their grip on power and capital. And we are being governed, I think, by a gangster cartel which Douglas Valentine detailed in his book, The CIA as Organized Crime. And unfortunately, our evolutionary brains also have a powerful means to deny unpleasant realities and compartmentalize cognitive dissonance and support group survival. And this is so frustrating for me. So I want to ask you, given all this, how can Westerners ever begin to hope for a more shared, democratic, and prosperous future? You know, when our owners can, you know, do what they're doing with all these false flags, you know, I haven't. You know, there's respected scholars like Noam Chomsky who, for years, refused to even talk about false flags, and then he finally admitted they kind of, sort of, might be true, but if so, they have no material influence on our state of affairs. And this begs the question, then why do they go to the trouble to pull them off nonstop? Just anyway, I want to tip my hat to you for, you know, actually having the guts to actually talk about this, because there's a lot of authors and journalists out there who will not touch it. Please take it away.
Well, where to begin? This new book that I wrote about, Lisa Peace's new book, A Lie Too Big to Fail, about the Robert Kennedy assassination. I wrote it within the context of what I call a quasi-review, because it's such a complex book and so long and so detailed. I felt that a lot of context had to be created for it, and that the real issue, as she says, is how in the 1960s the CIA took over the country. Not that they weren't working at that before those times, and that history goes way back, of course. But starting in the 60s with the killing of JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and then Robert Kennedy, these four assassinations really kind of closed down the American people with any sense of hope. And there's a trajectory from then to now that, of course, connects then to now. And you can see the decades from the 60s through the 70s, through the Reagan years, and Bush Sr. and Clinton and Bush Jr. and Obama and Trump. You can see how people became more and more depressed, despairing, inactive, and so forth.
A sense of helplessness and hopelessness, really.
Exactly, which is very, very widespread, and you sense it. It's hard to deny that it's there, but I do think there is hope. For example, you mentioned Douglas Valentine in his book, The CIA as Organized Crime. Just this week, 3 days ago, I brought Doug Valentine to the college where I teach.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Awesome.
and he gave a talk to an overflow auditorium of students and faculty about the CIA. And many of the students and faculty later spoke to me about it, and it just opened their eyes and raised questions as well, of course, about the CIA. But I take hope from that. I take hope from the fact that these young people are asking questions or thinking, and people do change. Even people in powerful positions who once acted one way, once in a while they take great turns. For example, President Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was somewhat of a cold warrior.
Mm-hmm.
He underwent this vast inner transformation,
Mm-hmm.
really a kind of religious conversion, a spiritual conversion, especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
And, you know, he knew he was marked for death, and he went forward, and he tried to end the Cold War. He wanted to abolish nuclear weapons, pull out of Vietnam, and all of those other things, and he knew they were after him. And, you know, he's a sign of great hope. Robert Kennedy was too.
Mm-hmm.
MLK, you know, there are people who inspire us still. And I don't know if it's because I'm just obstinate, a kind of, you know, part of my Irish background, Irish Catholic background, but you have to fight these people and never give up hope. You never should let them get you down, even though it's a, you know, a pretty dark scene. So Chomsky, well, you mentioned him. I've really given up, I suppose, on him changing his mind and coming out and questioning the things that he denies, whether that's these assassinations or especially JFK in September 11th, 2001. He did wonderful things at one point, but something happened, I believe, and I don't know what it is, but I don't think he's going to change unless perhaps he has a miraculous turnaround in his old age. That's always possible.
Absolutely. An epiphany.
Yes, a good word. Yeah.
Better late than never.
Yeah.
Like me.
Well, you've been at it for a while.
Hey, listen, speaking of, before I just looked at my calendar, and April 4th, in 1967, April 4th, today, anniversary, Martin Luther King gave his earth-shattering Beyond Vietnam, a Time to Break the Silence speech, and basically it was a lot of people said that when he gave that speech to denounce imperialism and genocide in Vietnam, that he basically at that point had signed his death warrant, and then exactly 365 days later, on April 4th, 1968, today, he was shot in Memphis by, sure as heck wasn't, what was the guy's name?
James Earl Ray.
Yeah, James Earl Ray. Shot by a CIA guy. And I don't know if it matters or not, but April 4th is also the day that Winston Smith started his secret diary in the book 1984 by George Orwell. So today is we're having this interview on a very special day, and to honor Dr. King. So yeah, I don't know what to do. And I think that's why a lot of websites will not pick up my work. A lot of journalists and authors will not talk to me because I don't beat around the bush anymore. I'm very open about false flags, and I think they are literally the catalyst to keep empire in control. And so anyway, I do want to thank you for having the courage to talk about them, and I hope you continue to do so. Hey, listen, you and other fine writers and journalists like Andrei Vlecek, who you mentioned, and C.J. Hopkins, both of whom are my friends, have been censored in the well-known publication Counterpunch. Yet other writers I know, like Paul Edwards, are still getting published there. And the degree of difference of what they write is not that, I don't really see a whit's worth of difference. But anyway, what's going on? I mean, it's it and the Greenville Post and the World Socialist website are like the three major socialist anti-imperial websites in the world. And what's going on? I mean, has the editorial board been blackmailed, extorted or infiltrated? I mean, why the selectivity? Why one author and not another? I mean, are they using algorithms like Twitter, Google, and Facebook and others, where if you use enough, quote, bad words, you get censored? And other than Counterpunch, are there other progressive alternative sites that you know of that have done similarly? And have you ever written for Counterpunch?
Yes, I've written probably about 24 articles that they have published, 24 of mine, approximately. I don't really know exactly. And then, as you probably know, recently there was a controversy I had with them surrounding a piece that disappeared from their front page.
Oh, yeah, I read that article. It was on the Greenville Post. I remember reading that, yeah.
It was about the CIA, and so we got into an argument, and that was the end of my writing for Counterpunch.
What's going on?
Well, I don't know, Jeff. I can't explain it. I do know that, as you said, a bunch of people, C.J. Hopkins, Andre Vlichik, Mike Whitney, Diana Johnstone, I believe.
I've interviewed her.
Yeah, I think Peter Koenig also. I mean, a whole group of people who used to write for them no longer write for them. They won't publish their work. Your guess is as good as mine. Yeah. I don't know.
Okay. I also interviewed Peter Koenig. He's quite a guy.
He's wonderful. He's great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I thought maybe you might have heard something. I mean, I just wonder if maybe they've got like a non-official cover CIA guy who's gotten in there. I don't know if they're blackmailing, Jeffrey St. Clair or extorting him. I mean, I don't know what's going on, but the whole thing just seems really bizarre, and the anti-imperial forces of the world just don't need these kind of, soap operas. But let's move.
But
go ahead.
To add to that, you know that Alexander Coburn was on the same page, so to speak, with Noam Chomsky on the JFK stuff, the September 11th.
Yeah. Agnostic.
Well, no, more than agnostic.
they denied it.
Yes. Far more than agnostic. And by the way, you may notice that I try not to use the name 9/11 for 9/11 because I believe that name is a mind-controlled piece of property.
You could be right, my friend. It could be.
So,
and the elitists love numerology. I mean, they're really into it. They pick these dates. They pick these dates for a reason. So okay, I'll start saying September 11th myself.
Well, it's a mouthful. That's the problem.
Hey, listen, I'm gonna step on your territory a little bit and ask you a question that you may have a difficult time answering, and I respect whatever you want to say and not want to say, but you are a professor at a U.S. School of Higher Learning, and Michael Parenti did a great lecture on the fallacy of academic freedom in the West, how he started out in the Ivy League. I think he started out at Princeton. How he started out in the Ivy League, and because of his views, kept having to take posts at smaller schools. And in my China Rising Radio Sinoland interview with Grover Furr, who's not very far from you, He said the only reason he still has a university job is because all of his writings that he does are about that are about Stalin and the USSR, while he teaches ancient languages. So he gets away with it on a technicality. He's not writing about what he teaches. And so I just want to find out, how does your school's administration deal with your blog writing? I mean, do you get censored or threatened? And have you experienced what Parenti and Furr have endured?
Well, first I should say that I love Michael Parenti's work.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's amazing.
Yeah, and and he's a guy that I also associate with this emphasis I place on the bodily nature of human life. And by bodily nature, I don't mean that it's not a spiritual bodily nature, but the connection between body and soul, and not abstract. And Michael was never abstract, and never was. And it probably has something to do with his family and baking bread in New York City and so forth, and his Italian background. But he's just wonderful. But to get back to your question, no one at the school where I teach has ever made a comment to me about my writing.
Good for you.
I've never been censored or threatened.
Wow. Good for you.
I will tell you, my teaching career is coming to an end in 2 months.
Why?
Well, vague reasons that were just conveyed indirectly to me. And that reason was that the attendance at the school is down, and we don't need that many professors in sociology and so forth. But I've taught there for almost 24 years.
Wow.
And now I'm being shown the door.
Wow. Do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'm 74.
Oh, 74. Okay. Well, you can at least get Social Security.
Great. I had no plans on retiring.
Okay. Well,
and so I'm being pushed out, and why exactly is anyone's guess, I suppose.
Okay. All right. Well, at least you had. At least, I guess other teachers have, professors have been harassed and cornered and everything else. But
well, I've gone through that in the past at other schools.
Oh, at other schools, so, okay.
Oh, yes. Going back to 1968.
Okay.
So I know exactly what Mike Parenti's talking about.
And Grover Furr and.
Yeah. I've had to be a kind of peripatetic teacher down through the years.
All right. Well, listen. To close out, thank you very much for that. I actually contacted Michael Parenti to write the introduction to my third book of the China trilogy, and he was very nice about it. He said, listen, I'm 80 or 81 or something like that, and that was like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
He says, I'm getting too old. I just can't do that kind of stuff anymore. And he says, I'm just happy to get up and live another day. So I didn't get Michael to to write the introduction for my book, but Andrei Vlecek did, so that's good enough.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Well, listen, to close out, this has been an amazingly eclectic Renaissance kind of interview, and to close out, tell us what websites you look at each week, and other than those two books you told us about, In Solitary Witness by Gordon Zahn, which I'll find, and Post, and Bread and Wine by Ignatius Saloni. Do you have a must book or three besides those two that you think people, the fans out there, should take a look at, and the websites that you like to look at each week?
Sure. Well, the first book that comes to mind is, I think, a profoundly important book, and that's a book that was written about 10 years ago by James Douglas.
Yeah, Unspeakable, JFK and the Unspeakable.
JFK and the Unspeakable.
Yeah.
Why he died and why it matters. And
yeah, I'll post that one. I've read it. It's great.
That's a profoundly important book. Well, I read so widely and in all genres. It's hard to pick out. I think I've read far too many books in my life. One of my favorite authors is Albert Camus.
Yeah, about Camus, yeah.
And I always recommend to everyone a little book of his called Lyrical and Critical Essays, which is a book profoundly beautiful and profoundly deep in its meditations on life and politics. I always recommend Tolstoy.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking books from long ago, but
that's fine.
Lisa Peace's new book I would highly recommend. And as for websites, well, I look at probably 15 every day. Greenville Post, Global Research, Off Guardian, Dissident Voice, just many different ones. And they're still out there. They're fighting the good fight. All of these websites, they need our support. I give my support through my writing, which is free of charge. I don't get paid for it. And so there are a lot of good websites. Those are a few that I look at every day.
Well, listen, my dear friend, this has been a wonderful interview, and I feel so thankful that I got to know you by email over the last few months, and I'm sorry. When I was back in the United States in 2017, and I went to New York and met Patrice Granville, and I also got to meet Jay Jansen, another great anti-imperial writer.
Right.
And I got to meet Ramsey Clark, and I'm sorry I didn't know you back then. I would have loved to have met you, but I will definitely put you on my bucket list the next time I'm back in New England. We'll have to get together and have and sneak a bottle of wine into a theater and watch a movie together.
That would be good. And a little bread with it.
There you go, Italian.
A little bread wine.
A little Italian bread. Yeah.
That's it.
Hey, listen, this has just been terrific, Ed. Thank you so much for coming on. I will get this up. I will get this up in the next couple of days, and please let's stay in touch.
Jeff, we will. And it's been wonderful talking to you, and it's been fun and informative.
Thank you very much.
Enjoyable.
All right. So, I'm glad you had fun.
Okay.
Have a good evening, and I'll let you know when it's up on the board.
Okay. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.